and it's starting to call to me. And it's like becoming an obsession. So in 1997, I was working for a cellular phone company. I gave them my notice because I knew when I went to Peru, I did not want to have 2-week vacation and have to come back. I wanted to stay there however long I needed to stay for whatever was going to happen to me. So I resigned from my job. A lot of people thought I was very courageous to do this. And I worked with my friend. I told you this friend had a tour agency who I worked with before. So his agency helped me. And also my ex-wife, who did the tours to Peru, she went with me for this first trip part of the way. And basically what we did is we knew we had to go to the northern part of Peru. We weren't exactly sure where we were going. My friend Eric, who worked for the tour agency, which is called Peru Mystic Tours, he created a map for me when we were there before and said, these are special places you should go to in the northern part of Peru when you're ready to look for the skull and just see what happens. So basically that's what we did, is we followed what he showed us. And I kept looking in the different places we went. I talked to the archaeologists. I talked to the workers on the site. Has anybody seen an artifact come out of any ruins in Peru that looks like a crystal skull? Everybody would say, no, we don't know what you're talking about. So in this first trip that I made, I was a little bit disheartened. I know this because I wrote an entire book about 3 trips that I took to Peru looking for the skull. It's called Journeys of the Crystal Skull Explorers, Travelogue Number 2, Search for the Blue Skull in Peru. So I'm actually enhancing, correcting some formats of the book. I'm re-editing it, and I'm adding some new information. So periodically, if you decide to get this book, you're going to see their notes from 2018 where I'm, adding comments from this point looking back, because the book originally came out as an ebook in 2012, right before we had all these big ceremonies going on then, and then it came out in 2013 in a printed form. So eventually what happens is, to make a long story short, because we could spend hours here going over all this 300-page book that I have,
right,
where I'm literally sharing what I call journal notes. Like every day I would write, because when you go into Peru, the vibration is so high. When you come back, you cannot remember everything that you did when you were there. It's impossible, because you're like in an altered state when you go into some of these places. So what I did is either I had a computer with me that was battery operated, or every next morning I would wake up and immediately write down everything that happened to me the day before, as best as I could remember it. So I was able to take the notes from these 3 days, and that's the basis for the book, is talking about each trip. So anyway, to make a long story short, we eventually go to a special place in the northern part of Peru, an ancient city called Sipan, which was created by a pre-Inca culture called the Mochica or the Mochi.
The Mochi people, yeah. That. I was going to ask you about that, because I thought because I kind of think that the Mochi people are, kind of the precursor to. I mean, I think that they're, in a lot of ways, almost as sacred as the Nazca people and Incas themselves. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, they're special people. The Lord of Sipan was discovered in the city in a tomb. In that area, they had his bones, but I think most of the rest of the artifacts found were in a museum in Lima. But anyway, what they discovered when they unearthed him was that he was buried with 12 layers of clothes on him.
Mm-hmm.
There were 4 people around him, 2 women and 2 men, and there was a man sitting over them in a meditative pose with his feet cut off. So, but he was in a meditative pose, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So they must have had a belief in the afterlife, that they went to all this expense to create an elaborate tomb with many objects. It's sort of like what the Egyptians do.
Mm-hmm.
So the key was when I was in Sipan, and I tried to describe for one of the archaeologists a place in Peru, my hand literally was magnetic being pulled, which I didn't know where I was going, but it was north of the city. He said, yes, you are being pulled to a city high up in the mountains called Huancabamba. I said, what's this? I said, well, you take a bus to this other city on the coast, and then you take a 9-hour bus ride up into the mountain, and you'll come to Huancabamba. And this is the area that your hand's being pulled. So I became elated because finally somebody's giving me some direction, like where am I supposed to go? So I thought this was going to be a very special place. And so I went there. And to make a long story short, there was some local people who helped us. When I stayed in their little tiny cabin made out of aluminum and wood, and probably their whole house was smaller in size than the entire living room I'm sitting in right now. I mean, they're very primitive, living up in the mountain. The blue crystal skull came to me in a vision 2 times. Once the late afternoon before, when I was in their kitchen just lying in my sleeping bag, I literally saw a hole open up above me, like in the air, and this blue skull flies out. And I don't know how I'm seeing this. It has to be, it's not in the physical. It's in my mind's image. I'm watching this. And then there's a tall man that stands behind them. And then in the morning before we left, the same thing happens. The blue skull came out. So I thought, this means I'm on the right track. I'm in the right place. And possibly this trip I'll see the skull. It's not just fantasy. I'm not making it up. It really exists. So I need to compress my 3 trips. I mean, I just told you that part so I could get you to the area. So anyway, I'm going to what's called the Laguna Negra, which is the Black Lagoon. It's high up in the Andes Mountains, probably 14 to 15,000 feet high. There's a lagoon with a mountain behind it. And so when I get to the lagoon and I look at the mountain, I see a skull face on the mountain. So I know this is the area that Spirit's been trying to send me to. So through these 3 trips, I basically get a history about the blue skull. And basically what I'm told is that in this area that I've come, there used to be a Lemurian temple. And 13 crystal skulls would sit in a special room, in a circular room on a glass case on the wall. So I had a vision of that. When Lemuria was destroyed, then the skull was taken to Atlantis. When Atlantis was destroyed, it was brought back to this area. And there were people who lived in the mountain, similar to the story told about the city called Telos underneath Mount Shasta.
Right.
For those listeners who don't know this, let's just briefly explain it.
Yeah, please do.
So according to, and I don't remember her name, this woman that comes out who says she's a princess of the city, she claims that what happened is when Lemuria was destroyed, which is supposed to be almost around the same time as Atlantis was destroyed, I guess. It went under the water. There was some kind of explosion with gas, or they were misusing technology. There was some problems. The survivors went to their colonies, and apparently they found a mountain to build a city underneath to protect themselves from the surface. Because for us living on the surface, our planet periodically goes through these immense, tremendous physical changes, whether it's a polar shift or a large meteor hitting or whatever. There's just has been a number, and they can see this in the rock when the archaeologists look at it, a number of periods of time where the entire surface of the planet is literally wiped out and life has to be restarted. But if you're living underground and the Earth goes through a polar shift, you're not going to feel anything because the ground's going to protect you. So the people understood this. So Telos is the name of a Lemurian city, descendants from Lemuria. It went there. But what I kept getting a vision of and a sensing of is that in this mountain by the lagoon, and there was even some small boys we met on the first trip who told us there was a shaman who said there was a city in the mountain. I'm thinking that this is probably the same. There are Lemurians because this is Peru, this is part of Lemuria. When Lemuria sank, the Andes Mountains rose. And so I'm thinking that maybe these Lemurians have a city under the mountain and they have this blue skull. They're protecting this blue skull. So anyway, eventually what happens is after the blue skull comes back to this area, maybe it's hidden in the city, for a period of time it's sent by the Lemurians for the Lord of Sipan to have this skull. And then his counselor is asked after so many years, I guess he has to give it back. He brings it back to this mountain and leaves it on the surface so the people who are in the city underneath can take it back. But for me, the challenge with the blue skull is, which is going to make it for some unbelievable, is that it doesn't exist in this moment in our physical dimension. So here I've gone and wrote this 300-page book with all these notes that I've taken on 3 trips. Each trip I spent between 7 and 10 days out in these areas, going through the ancient sites and having experiences and everything. And, I didn't meet this skull. But the thing is for me, I don't really need to meet it because whenever I think about it, I sense it around in my aura. I can feel it energetically around me, communicating with me. And it's the one again who said, because you brought me up in this new novel, which we haven't talked about yet, I put him in the novel, you should enhance the book that you've written about me. So if people say, what is this blue skull? Your main character is gifted. What's that all about? Well, here's the book on the blue skull that I've written, since 2012, 2013 that I just enhanced. Mm-hmm. So these 2 books are linked. But I did receive a message from this crystal skull. If your listeners believe me that I'm not half crazy here. And basically the message said is that its vibrational frequency is too high right now for it to come down and be in the physical. But one day it could show up and it has the ability to apport itself anywhere that it chooses to go. So that means that, let's say the blue skull decides, okay, humanity's now ready to deal with me. I'm just going to appear out of nowhere. Well, I don't think that's the way it's going to come out. I think somehow it will allow itself to be discovered so that, when people hear about it, they won't say, oh, it just came out of nowhere. It's totally a fake. I'm never going to go see it. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's an expedition or something. I don't even know if I'm the one that's supposed to find it or whatever. I just know for the moment I'm supposed to talk about it, and I'm having this communication with an intelligence who tells me it's the blue skull, that it was around in Atlantis and Lemuria. It gave me its history. I went to the right place, and I was supposed to write the book. So, that's kind of my story. But here's the thing. There have been a few people who have read the book, and they see that skull. It's like it appears to them or they see it. Or the other thing that's happened is at certain presentations, I said to people, would you like to experience this blue skull and see if you think it's real or not? And they said, yeah, sure. And so what it does is it sits, I put my right hand out with my palm up, and it literally will come sit on my hand. I can actually feel a little weight on my hand. And then I have people put their hand on top of my right hand, and they feel a tremendous energy around it. So that's kind of my story, with the blue skull. I think this is, in the book itself, it's not just about the blue skull. It's about all these places we travel and what Peru is like, and, some things about Machu Picchu and Cusco and UFOs and people we've met and what they're saying and their experiences. So it's a very elaborate book on Peru, even though it focuses on my personal journey to find the skull. And then I threw in there, in the last section in the addendum, where I have some pictures of UFOs appearing in the sky that were taken during our trips, or lights that look like UFOs. There is an amazing stone door, which most people know as Amaru Maru, but its real name I think is pronounced, although my friend didn't tell me, just wrote it. I think it's pronounced Vilka Uta, which means house of the sun or house of lights. And this is a door cut into a huge stone by Lake Titicaca that we had a chance to visit. It has the most amazing energy.